they're thinking can do this kind of surgical strike like they're the Israeli Air Force or the American Air Force against countries that without air defense or air force. But Pakistan is not that such a country. The AWACs planes allow the Pakistani Air Force to see the Indian fighter jets before the Indian fighter jets could detect the Pakistani fighters. And then they relay the coordinates of those Indian fighters, including the French Rafales jets, back to the J10Cs in the Pakistani Air Force. So once the Pakistani pilots in their J10C receives their attack coordinates from the AWACS planes, they just lock their missiles, fire, and that's the rest was history.
You must have seen the presser of our AWM, the media guy of the Air Force. He also made us listen to an audio. Was that audio also possible because of that plane?
Well, this is interesting because now we know that the Pakistani side, they probably have quite advanced electronic listening system. Not only they could see further than the Indian side, they could also listen to the Indian electronic communication. This is also a little bit panic on the Indian pilot side, so they use clear code communication. You don't even need a code cracker, like a decipher to figure out what they were saying. You can just listen to it. This is why the Pakistani Air Force, despite being numerically outnumbered, they had the upper hand because they could see and they can hear. But if all of your media, if everyone is all saying crazy shit, then there's a problem.
That's right? Not free.
If it's just some French element, if it's just some French element in media, okay, I understand. If only 50%, okay, I still understand. But if everybody is saying all kind of crazy shit, that's a system problem.
How are people, experts, looking at what happened between Pakistan and India military equipment wise?
Well, first of all, before this battle, there was a lot of skeptics, especially in the Western world, about Chinese weapon system. They will say, oh, it's made in China. It's probably shoddy quality. It probably doesn't work. You even have some crazy articles from Wall Street Journal that claims that Chinese missiles are filled with water, right? Now we know for sure that's not true because that PL15 missile was definitely not filled with water. I mean, the second Top Gun movie that had Tom Cruise flying. Okay, that's just fantasy. That's a fantasy. We now know for sure this fantasy because in this India-Pakistan air battle, neither side even saw each other.
Yeah.
F-18, you will never have a chance to see face to face to do dogfight. You have no chance because the other side will see you far off and they will fire missiles at you and you are toast. Israel, they kind of brag about their Iron Dome all the time. Guess what? Iranians still hit them, and your Houthis still hit them, and they couldn't even. This is Israel. Not only they have Iron Dome system, they also have the U.S. deployed THAAD system, and they had the U.S. Navy using their anti-air defense capability to help Israel to shoot down these missiles. Yet those missiles still landed in Israel. So if you have enough missiles, you can overwhelm any air defense system. U.S. Navy lost 3 F-18s against a country with no air force and no air defense, and F-18 is, let's face it, it's a much older plane. It's a much older plane, I do not think it's more capable than Raphael, and I definitely do not think he will fare better.
They're saying that we won't do trade with you. That same threat for Pakistan is nothing because Pakistan does not do any trade with America. But if the Americans say that to the Indians, that means a lot, no?
Yeah, I mean, this is Donald Trump.
First of all, I just want to know your side of the story. How do you see this skirmish between Pakistan and India?
This has been a ongoing issue for a while, and this the timing of the latest escalation was kind of interesting because this happened at a time when United States is actively trying to rope in India on its China containment bandwagon. And to talk about timing, it happened right. The attack in Kashmir happened right after Vance went to India,
He
right?
he was in
Vance
India, yeah.
famously for to his timing, he went to, yeah, he went to see the Pope, then Pope dies, then he went to India, and then
This
the
happens.
Kashmir attack happened. And it looks like Indian government is, they're playing politics. I mean, this is from based on how the operation from India side went from the beginning, because they made a conscious decision on the first day, at least on the first day, they did not target Pakistani military installation. They did not target Pakistani Air Force air base or anti-air defense. They targeted what they claimed to be terrorist camp inside Pakistan. So they didn't military installations. We know that, which you would, if they didn't target military installation, what did they target? Right, they target civilians, and this is what Pakistan side is saying. They targeted civilians, but the mission as defined by the Indian Air Force in the beginning seems limited, because they seem to think they can carry out this so-called surgical strike against soil inside Pakistan without retaliation, and possibly because they're also trying to avoid further escalation to a full war. And this tells me that the Indian government was doing this mostly to kind of satisfy the Indian public's outcry for revenge after the Kashmir attack. And so they felt like, okay, if we do this, this will satisfy our public. You show our strength. You show that, yeah, we are decisive. We did this thing. We're hitting them back, and it's a crowd pleaser, right? Because the tension between India and Pakistan, they know this will work to their advantage. But um, you know, there's a famous saying that war is an extension of politics. And in a way, the Indian Air Force, the way that the planned operation, they're kind of doomed to fail from the beginning, because it's either arrogance or wishful thinking that they think they will face no retaliation from the Pakistan side. Um, and this happened at a time when they have been telegraphing their attack way in advance. The Pakistan side knew something was going on. India side, they have been announcing they're going to do something. So, for days, the Pakistani Air Force have been on full alert. They have planes patrolling the border, patrolling the airspace, ready for Indian attack. And yet, Indian Air Force chose to attack, and thinking that they can strike with impunity, without retaliation. I mean, that's foolhardy. And from the debriefing that was given by the Pakistan Air Force afterwards, we can see that uh, you know every move on the Indian side was visible through to the Pakistani Air Force through their radars. So here you have a bunch of Indian planes they're armed to carry out ground to ground attack. I mean, maybe they also have escorts, but they were designed to launch bomb from the Indian airspace, so they can claim they did not violate Pakistan airspace, yet they're launching bomb against Pakistani soil. And somehow they think they can get away with it without retaliation. I mean, that's like I say, so either naive thinking or very foolhardy. And I think this is the fault fully falls on the Indian politicians who made the decision to carry out the strike. And then what we know is that Pakistani Air Force was ready for them. They have been ready
A lot
for
of days.
weeks, being on high alert, expecting this attack. And when the Indian Air Force made their move, the Pakistani side waited for them to make the first attack, and then they retaliated, and we saw the results. Even though Indian media is trying to paint a whole different picture, but the I mean, it's pretty obvious to, I think, to everyone, including the world media at this point, that it was a Pakistani victory in the air, especially in the first day. You have multiple Indian aircraft down. This was confirmed. This was first reported by Indian media. The Hindu reported that Indian officials said there were 3 Indian jets down on the side of Kashmir. And yet, the Hindu was under some pressure, apparently, to retract their article. But CNN follows suit. The CNN followed up on the interview of French intelligence official who confirmed that at least one Rafale jet has been shut down from the Indian Air Force. And then you have American officials spoke to Reuters who confirmed that yes, Pakistani Air Force Chinese-made J10C shot down at least 2 Indian jets. So we know we have at least 2 confirmed kills. On the Pakistani side, of course, on the Indian side, of course, the Pakistani Air Force claimed there were 5 to 6 jets were shot down. We still need more third-party confirmations, but we know that in the first day of engagement, the Indian Air Force got their nose bloodied. And again, I think this is the fault lies on fully on the Indian politicians. Because I think the Indian Air Force, they're a professional force. They're just as good, if not better, than the Pakistani pilots. Pakistani pilots are very, very well experienced because they have been many of the Pakistani pilots, they flew for Gulf countries, so they have a lot of experience, a lot of combat experience, and on top of that, they just have a better system. They have a better war fighting system in place because from the briefing, both the briefing that we received from the Pakistani Air Force and from what we've seen from the results of the battlefield, it seems like the Indian Air Force were caught by surprise. The fact that their every move was mapped by the Pakistani side and was expected and then countered. And the Pakistani side, they have not only they have the Chinese J10C, which is a 4.5 generation um, air fighter, but they also have the latest Chinese air-to-air missile PL15, which is carried by J10C. On top of that, Pakistan have an integrated air defense system, and they use the AWACs planes, which can detect the Indian fighters before the Indian fighters could detect any movement on the Pakistani side. So this air battle is not like this is nothing. This is something that we haven't seen before. According to the Pakistani side, there were over 100 aircraft involved. So that would make this the largest aerial battle, largest modern aerial battle in the 21st century. And the way it unfolded was nothing like we have ever seen before because there's no dogfights. This is not the Top Gun Maverick, right? I enjoy Top Gun movies. I enjoy both of them, but this is the neither side ever came into visual range of each other. They never
How
could see each other. They could only saw each other on their radars,
yeah, yeah.
and they fired their missiles hundreds of kilometers
That is
apart.
so cool.
Go ahead.
This is the most interesting part of the conversation. So let me just take it from here. You named J10Cs, PL15s. It's all good, no problem. And the integrated system. What more can you tell us about the J10Cs and the PL15s and this war beyond vision?
Well, okay, so there are several advantages to the Pakistani side. I already mentioned the Pakistani pilots they're excellent. They have a lot of experience. Two, um, when they bought the Chinese weapon system like the J10C, which by the way was not the original J10 that was rolled out back in 1998. This is the J10C was the latest version that started production in 2018,
Okay.
and the Pakistani side took delivery in 2022. So the Pakistani side, they took delivery of their J10C basically around the same time when India took delivery of their French Rafale jets. Actually, the first batch of French Rafale jets came to India even earlier. They took one of the Rafale jets has been confirmed to be shut down. Was the first plane that was sent to India from France. That was a sign up the number BS001,
Okay.
and that arrived in India in 2000. So the Indian air pilots, they actually had a couple more years of practice with their French jet than the Pakistani pilots with their J10Cs. But there's a vital difference. When Pakistan made the weapon purchases from China, the Pakistani Air Force were able to conduct joint exercises with the Chinese PLA Air Force. We saw that in 2023. And there's one important detail of that exercise. People can find videos of it online somewhere. I watched the video again. I saw the AWACs planes was taking off in the background. And that's a very important piece of the Pakistani victory on the first day of the aerial combat, because the AWACS planes allow the Pakistani Air Force
To
to see
see.
the Indian fighter jets before the Indian fighter jets could detect the Pakistani fighters. And then they relay the coordinates of those Indian fighters, including the French Rafale jets, back to the J10Cs in the Pakistani Air Force. So once the Pakistani pilots in their J10C receives their attack coordinates from the AWACS planes, they just lock their missiles, fire, and that's the rest was history. This is why the Indian Air Force was unprepared for this response. First they couldn't see the other side. By the time they saw the air-to-air missile coming, it was
It was
already too late. They didn't have time to react. This is probably why the Rafale was shut down. And Rafale is one of the most advanced European fighter jet.
Yeah, we'll come to
Um,
the Rafales.
and
First,
it's
first,
also
you could
one of
could
the
you
most.
could you
Go ahead.
could you
Go ahead. Go ahead.
explain more about the AWACS planes? So that plane is actually a surveillance plane. By what you're telling us, it's actually a plane which gives eyes to the rest of the plane in the area, right?
So this is a part of the electronic warfare, right? And this is a part where the Pakistan had Air Force had a lot of practice, especially in their joint drill with the Chinese PLA Air Force. You saw that AWACS plane was being used in their joint drill. I think it's called the Shaheen Exercise 2023.
Mm-hmm.
They hold this exercise every few years,
Mm-hmm.
but in 2023, in specifically the Pakistani Air Force, they use their J10C to join to do the joint drill with the Chinese
China.
PLA Air Force. And because a modern battleground is about system integration,
The
and the
environment.
Pakistan Air Force were able to leverage everything they have in their arsenal. So the AWACS plane, they're also called the early warning, airborne air early warning system. So what they have is they have very powerful radars. They can cover a much wider range than the corresponding fighter jet, than either the J10C or the Raphael. So they could see much further. And then apparently there's a tight electronic integration that happened between the J10C and the Pakistani Air Force AWACS. AWACS plane were able to effectively communicate with the J10C. Once they saw the Indian fighter jet, they can send their coordinates, beam those coordinates to the J10C, and once the J10C receives those coordinates, they can user missiles to lock on those targets and fire those missiles without ever come to face with the Indian fighter jet. Because this fight happened like hundreds of miles away. All the Pakistani pilots, they saw just tiny dots on their radar, and they press a button that fired their PL-15 missiles, and then the rest is history.
Okay, so
Go ahead. You were
there was
going to
another
ask a
question.
question.
You must have seen the presser of our AVM, Aurangzeb, the media guy of the Air Force. He also like made us listen to an audio. Was that audio also possible because of that plane?
Well, this is interesting because now we know that the Pakistani side, they probably have quite advanced electronic listening system. They were able, not only they could see further than the Indian side, they could also listen to the Indian electronic communication,
That is
and this
scary.
and also I think there was a little bit of panic on this is also a little bit panic on the Indian pilot side. So they use like clear code communication. You don't even need a code cracker, like a decipher to figure out what they were saying. You can just listen to it, and so this is why the Pakistani Air Force, despite being numerically outnumbered, they had the upper hand because they could see and they can hear. And whereas the Indian pilots were essentially flying blinds because they just got fed with ground targets that were designed to attack. They were given the ground targets were going to attack, and they did not, for some reason, they did not expect the Pakistani side retaliation. So they were caught by surprise, and when the French jet Raphael supposedly have very good, anti-electronic warfare capabilities, but it looks like he wasn't good enough because, supposedly if they could see the air-to-air missile coming, they can deploy some countermeasures. But apparently, this happened. They have very short time window to react for the Indian Air Force pilot,
So, Carl, what
and by the
happens
time they
is actually
saw the
when a
air-to-air
jet
missile
gets
coming, it was too late.
I've heard, I don't know, let's just confirm. When a jet gets locked by another jet, isn't doesn't that jet make any sound? So when if Pakistanis saw the Indian jets from way beyond, they could, and they locked their targets, didn't the Indians know that something is coming after them?
Well, I think one thing that happened is the Pakistani side, their J10C, they turned off their radars. So they were harder to detect because they're relying on their AWACS planes to do the
Okay.
detection for them. And then to map out the coordinates of where the Indian fighter jets are. So, by the time they fired those air-to-air missiles, there's only a fraction of time. I wouldn't say seconds, but maybe fraction of a minute. The Indian could have time to react, and I think by the time they saw the either they did not, somehow their radar did not pick up the PL-15 missile incoming, or by the time they pick up, it was too late. There's several possibilities because the PL-15 air-to-air missile is quite recent, so there hasn't been a lot of information in the NATO airspace, Air Force, or the Indian Air Force. They may not have just enough information for the radar to know the profile of the PL-15, the incoming
Okay.
PL-15, what that radar section would look like. So there's could be that recognition problem. But in any case, what we know, it was not enough time for them to react.
Okay, so as you mentioned the PL15s, we want to know more about the PL15s. We've heard that the PL15s are not the same PL15s, the export versions. They are the original PL15s that the China gave Pakistan. So do you have more information on this?
Well, this is still a lot of speculation on this. So the export version of the PL15 has a range of about 140 kilometers,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the non-export version has 300-kilometer range, which is significantly longer.
Double.
And um, so the now this is so we there's a speculation that Pakistani side actually receives the non-export version of PL15 from China. We don't know that for sure unless it's confirmed by either China or Pakistan. That's the case, but there's also the fact that the Indian Rafale jets, something the only thing they have similar in range is what they call the Meteor air-to-air missiles. However, each Rafale can only carry 2 Meteor missiles, whereas the Pakistani Air Force J10C, they could carry 10 PL15 air-to-air missiles. So I mean, like that's in a head-on fight. There's just much more firepower. There's like 5 times more firepower from the J10C, and and also the fact that as I started from the beginning, the Indian Air Force kind of lost before their operation started because
Yeah.
they were giving a political objective, which was to attack certain ground targets, and they were expecting a kind of aerial combat with the Pakistani Air Force. So whereas the Pakistani Air Force were waiting for them. So there's that element of surprise as well. So I think this is the combination of a better integration of systems on the Pakistani side, better situation awareness, and and better training that really enabled the Pakistani Air Force to come out ahead in this air battle.
So, what makes the PL-15 stand out from the rest of the missiles?
Well, first of all, they have longer range. I mean, like this is where it kind of the capability of PL15 missile work very nicely with the deployment of the AWACS planes on the Pakistani side. Because first of all, the Pakistani AWACS plane can see very far ahead, and then without J10C themselves to be able to detect the Indian fighter jet, they can just rely on the data link from their AWACS planes. And then because the PL15 has a very long range, then they can fire this without the Indian aircraft, even Raphael, even aware of the existence of the Pakistani fighters on the other side of the border. I mean, like this is really a combination of factors that contributed to the Pakistani Air Force victory in the first day.
Okay. And tell us more about the Raphael. How was it the tough guy in the room? How did these J10Cs bring down this tough guy? And what does this mean to the aviation world, to the military industry?
Yeah, Raphael is a very good plane. I mean, like I don't want to say it's a bad plane. It's the top of the line, most advanced European fighter jet. This is why the Indian Air Force made the decision to pay the big bucks for them. 10 days before this air battle, India announced they're gonna spend another $7.4 billion. That's a billion with a B, $1 billion USD to purchase 26 additional Raphael. That comes to like about $284 million per plane. Of course, that includes spare parts and training. But you know what? Indian pilots are not getting the same type of the training that the Pakistani pilots were getting directly from the Chinese PLA Air Force, because that they didn't the Indian Air Force, they didn't get to do joint drill with the French Air Force after the purchase Rafale planes, whereas Pakistani Air Force, after they purchased J10C and commissioned it, they get to practice every year with the Chinese PLA Air Force on how on different scenario of this air battle. So what happened is basically the Pakistani side were were able to do very competently carry out what they had been practiced, which is how to use AWACS planes, how to use their longer range PL15 missiles to destroy the enemy target before the enemy even aware of them. I mean, they have been practicing this, but whereas the Indian side, even, despite paying insane number, astronomical sum for these French planes, they're not getting the same type of training. They're not getting hands-on training from the French pilots, and so this shows, this is because Pakistan and China ultimately have a very tight relationship. This is the iron brother relationship, and this is why there has been very tight integration with the Pakistani military and the Chinese military. But the Indian military do not enjoy that same type of relationship with, say, the France, or even US. Even though India do conduct joint exercise with US like once every few years, but they're not getting the same type of hands-on training. So it's the battlefield was uneven to start out with, and to top that off, this was an entirely political decision by the Indian politicians to trying to cash in on this aftermath of the Kashmir attacks. They're thinking they can do this kind of surgical strike like they're the Israeli Air Force or the American Air Force against countries that are without air defense or air force. But Pakistan is not that such a country. Pakistan has very competent air force and very competent air defense. So this is what happened.
You talked about the bond between Pakistan and China, the ironclad bond. So tell us more about this. How did Pakistan and China end up like this?
Well, it's because of India. I mean, let's be frank. This is because of India. Pakistan and China didn't start out with a very close relationship. In fact, in the beginning, Pakistan was probably more antagonistic toward China than India was. But then, after the brief India-China brotherhood period in the 1950s, the two sides had a falling out. This was over mainly over the issue of Tibet. And then in 1962, India and China fought a border war. This kind of really shaped the geopolitics of South Asia for the last 60 years, because ever since Pakistan saw opportunity, they saw that, okay, now India and China are suddenly on the opposite side. Enemy of my enemy is my friend potentially. So that's when this is when the rapprochement between Pakistan and China started after 1962. But ever since, the two side has been brought closer and closer, and this is also because of kind of the change in U.S. policy toward Pakistan after Cold War ended. For a while during the Cold War, U.S. was mostly supporting Pakistan versus India because India was more closely aligned with the Soviet camp. But after the Cold War, U.S. did almost like 180. You slap sanction on Pakistan for supposedly proliferation of missiles and nukes, etc. And by the way, China helped Pakistan build its missiles and nuclear program as well. So this is this, and when United States have sanctioned Pakistan, especially withholding the F-16 jets that Pakistan already paid for. This is where China came in. China says, you know what? No problem. We can sell you jets, and this is where Pakistan started. And by the way, there's the reason there's limited participation of F-16 in the recent conflict between India and Pakistan, because as part of the sale of F-16 from U.S. to Pakistan, U.S. had Pakistan government to sign an end user agreement, which says you are not supposed to use F-16 against India. I mean, which severely limits the utility of those F-16s. And whereas, when China sells J10C or JF-17 to Pakistan, there's no such clause. There's no string attached. This is your plane now. You do whatever you want with it. And so that's a big difference. This is why, Pakistan used mostly J10C and JF-17 in the most recent fight. And the Pakistan has, we can see that from everything from the Pakistani fighter jet to the Pakistani air defense system. Now it's heavily sourced from China, and this is and Pakistan also rightly saw that China was rising power. China was becoming the manufacturing superpower of the world, and that they the two align the two sides' interest coincides in specifically in the South Asian context, because India had been having dispute with both nations. The latest India China border flare up was back in 2020, wasn't that long ago, and so this is why really this is what brought Pakistan and China together for the last 40, 50 years.
Okay. So coming back to this episode, how was this episode between Pakistan and India? What difference did this bring, as I mentioned earlier, towards the military industry around the world? How are people, experts, looking at what happened between Pakistan and India, military equipment wise?
Well, first of all, before this battle, there was a lot of skeptics, especially in the Western world, about Chinese weapon system. They will say, "Oh, it's made in China. It's probably shoddy quality. It probably doesn't work." You even have some crazy articles from like Wall Street Journal that claims that Chinese missiles are filled with water. Right now, we know for sure that's not true, because that PL15 missile was definitely not filled with water. And we saw that the Chinese weapon system works, and at a much much cheaper price tag. As I mentioned earlier, India had to pay like what two you know hundred more than $100 million per plane of Raphael, and then on top of that, pay another 100 million per plane in terms of training and spare parts. Whereas the J10C, each unit price is about $40 to $50 million. So they're like significantly cheaper. For price of one Raphael, you can get like 4 J10Cs, which is just as good. And it's like a no-brainer for a lot of countries, especially in the global south. This is why now we hear talks of Egypt acquiring a batch of J10Cs from China, because they saw the results. I mean, its result is indisputable. They say proof in the pudding. I mean, this you can't get more clear proof than this. So I mean, I think there will be a wider market for Chinese weapon system, especially for countries that have been paying a hefty price tag for Western military products, for Western platform. One is because the price, but two is also U.S. tend to use their weapon sale as a tool to control and shape other countries' foreign policy, right? Just like the end user agreement that made the Pakistani government sign about the use of F-16s. China is not going to tell you how you're going to use your Chinese weapons. If you pay money, they will deliver. That's it. And so that no string attached policy, is welcomed by many countries. And then this also shows that Pakistani Air Force is highly capable. In like India cannot conduct what they think would be like a limited war and prevail over Pakistan, just simply because Pakistan has a very competent air force, a very competent air defense, and in fact, in the mastery of the electronic warfare, apparently Pakistan had, they got a one leg up than the Indian Air Force at the moment. Maybe Indian Air Force will learn their lessons, maybe not, but we'll see.
Okay, I've also heard that they got these Rafales after what happened before when they came and threw their payloads on Balakot. Is that true?
I'm sorry.
I've
What's
heard
that?
that these Rafales they got after Pakistan and India had a skirmish before in October when they came into Pakistan, and that Abhinandan episode happened when we got their captain, their wing commander Abhinandan. And then I've heard that after that they were saying because we didn't have Rafales, so our guys went down. And then after that they got the Rafales, and this is what happened after it.
Yeah, yeah. So the first batch of Raphael was delivered to Pakistan, to India in 2020, and then the incident you referred to, I believe that happened in 2019,
Yeah.
right? So you'll be right. You'll be correct. The timeline does match. India, because they chose Raphael because it's Raphael is superior than their current their existing arsenal, which is composed of the MiG 29 and Su-30. In terms of electronic warfare capability, Raphael is much more capable than those two other planes. By the way, there was also a MiG 29 and
Yeah.
Su-30 that got shut down in the Kashmir side. So like
All of them.
that's and yeah. So basically, everything in the top of the line Indian Air Force arsenal that was brought down, and I think this will probably prompt a very serious rethink on the Indian defense side about their strategy vis-a-vis Pakistan. At least they will have to think twice about carrying out a stunt like that. This is why in the following day they did not send any more
Yeah.
manned
Yeah.
aircraft to do the attack. They learned their lessons, so they just send out drones and
Unmanned.
missiles.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, Carl, what do we know about the S-400s, and do we have any information about them?
Well, we do have, the Pakistan Defense Ministry do claim that the destroyer S-400 that was carried out by attack by a Pakistani JF-17 launching a Chinese supersonic missile. But we still need to wait for further confirmation for that. And like the thing is, people are making judgment right now on both sides on the capability of air defense system, but you have to realize when you have enough missiles, you can overwhelm any air defense system. Like Israel, they kind of brag about their Iron Dome like all the time. Guess what? Iranians still hit them, and your Houthis still hit them, and like they couldn't even they. This is Israel. Not only they have Iron Dome system, they also have the U.S. deployed THAAD system, and they had the U.S. Navy using their anti-air defense capability to help Israel to shoot down these missiles. Yet those missiles still landed in Israel. So if you have enough missiles, you can overwhelm any air defense system. Now, having said that, from the satellite pictures of the aftermath of the attack, we can see that if you're just simply launching missiles, limited missiles on drone attack, you will not do significant lasting damage. Like you may bomb a airport or air runway, but those things could be repaired within hours. You're not going to be able to penetrate the really hardened bunkers that hold more expensive jet unless you actually fly over and use those laser guided heavy bombs. But then that will require you flying to other people's airspace. Then your plane will be liable to their air defense system. So this is what we learned. Like you can lob missiles and drones, but they will not do significant damage to the other side unless you do like a full scale attack. that involve your man fighters with heavier weapons, heavier load weapons, and do like a direct attack. But again, that's a further escalation, and also that places your man fighter at direct risk of the enemy's air defense system. So for me, I think the takeaway from this is that the we're not quite in the age of fully automated drone missile attack yet. We still There's still a role to play for man fighters, and the man fighters are vulnerable, and they also when it comes down to it comes down to system integration. You gotta and Pakistan side got that part pat down pretty well. They were able to deploy all their asset and utilize them in a very effective manner.
Okay, so we're moving on towards the last part of our show. There was this, I would want to confirm this from you. We heard that the Indians were wanted to buy Hornets from America, and then they moved from there to Rafales. They didn't go for the Hornets, and that did not, America didn't like that. Was that true?
Well, this was actually reported by the Indian media. They
Okay.
say it's American that's pushing Indian government to instead of buying Rafales to buy F-18s. Look, man, we saw the performance of F-18 recently in the U.S. war against Yemen. U.S. Navy lost three F-18s against a country with no air force and no air defense, and F-18 is, let's face it, it's a much older plane. It's a much older plane, I do not think it's more capable than Raphael, and I definitely do not think he will fare better. It's not, again, it's not the planes. It's a system integration. That's the lesson to take from the aerial battle, because this is the Pakistan side. They had their AWACs planes working with their J10s, working with then the J10s with their missiles, all working seamlessly together. That is a key. It's not about individual planes or even missiles. It's about the system working together. And it's highly likely the Pakistan side also used their electronic warfare to jam radars on the Indian side, so that made them even more confused. So this is really where the 21st century air battle, how it's fought. It's the electronic warfare become increasingly important. This is a lesson to take away from
What
this.
what I'm trying to point out is,
F-18,
yeah, yeah,
that's a 20th
yeah. Go ahead.
F-18 is a 20th century plane, man. It's a military hardware from like from like 1980. I mean, this is from an era of Top Gun, the first movie, right? I mean, the second Top Gun movie,
Better
they
planes.
had Tom Cruise flying. Okay, that's just fantasy. That's a fantasy. There's no, they had, I don't know if you saw the movie. It's the
Yeah,
second
yeah,
the Top Gun movie,
yeah, yeah,
Mavericks. They
yeah,
had
yeah,
Tom Cruise flying Hornets
yeah.
to fight fifth generation fighter jet. We now know for sure this fantasy, because in this India Pakistan air battle, neither side even saw each other.
Yeah.
F-18, you will never have a chance to see face to face to do dogfight. You have no chance, because the other side will see you far off and they will fire missiles at you, and you are toast. And that's the reality of the 21st century air battle. The whole Hollywood stuff, you gotta have a suspension of belief to fully enjoy it. But that's what it is. It's
Yeah.
Hollywood. It's fantasy.
What I'm trying to
It's
point
not
out,
real.
what I'm trying to point out is, were the Americans not happy? Because some people are saying that they did want to like cut India to size, because of many things.
Well, Well, I think I'm not sure about that, but I think U.S. always want to use any chance to upsell their military
Profits.
hardware. They won't sell their best stuff, but they will sell all the kind of the watered down version. And then I'm sure now there will be movement to try to get India to buy F-35s, which will be interesting because you know if Pakistan gets Chinese J-35 and if the J-35 shoot down F-35, that would be truly embarrassing for United States.
Yeah.
Um, forget about Taiwan. You can just see what happens in real battle situation. So yeah, I don't know if U.S. can afford that
Mm.
kind of the damage to their reputation. So we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see.
But actually, threatening India, which is an ally, American ally, for they're saying that we won't do trade with you. That same threat for Pakistan is nothing because Pakistan does not do any trade with America. But if the Americans say that to the Indians, that means a lot, no?
Yeah, I mean, this is Donald Trump. Trump is slapping tariff on everybody, and recently because he was levying high tariff against China, so the Apple CEO Tim Cook's like, okay, we'll just move
Yeah.
enough iPhone production to India to supply the American market, right? So everyone, all the Americans will get made in India iPhones, and everyone else in the world get made in China iPhone. But Donald Trump just recently made a statement. He's like, no, 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 that's not good enough. I didn't say you could move to your phone to India and get away with it. I want you. I don't want to. I don't want you to move your production to India. I want you to move stuff back to United States because Donald Trump is still very much kind of like 1980s guy. That's his like heydays. It's like the 20th century, right? That's where his mind is. He is still thinking like, I mean, like he is still no, literally, he's still like in that same mindset of the trade war against Japan back in the 80s and 90s. And like he was very upset with the Japanese when like Japan was supposedly taking over. And so he's still fighting that battle right now. This is why he's slapping tariff on everybody, or even supposedly allies. Not just India, but Europe too.
Yeah.
EU got hit with tariff. Japan got hit with tariff. Japan, he slapped 25% tariff on all foreign autos and auto parts, and that doesn't affect China because China doesn't sell any cars in United States. But you in fact impact Japan, Germany, Korea, all U.S. allies. So this is really a Donald Trump thing. So he is he's just like slapping tariff against everybody and making everybody realize, okay, these guys are not serious people. U.S. is not a serious country, and these jokers in Washington are not serious people. And so I think this is why even before this tariff war, India was actually trying to flip back to be more neutral toward China. They were talking about trade deal, but then when the tariff war first happened, India trying to hatch onto that. They say, "Oh, okay, we're going to be the first to make a deal with America. We're going to we're going to lower our tariff. We'll do whatever they say." But then that's not good enough. And Donald Trump, apparently, Trump said, oh, we don't want to move. We don't want Apple to move their production to India. That's not what I want. So India now faced with a choice. Either you continue to partner with this very unreliable and very volatile partner that's Donald Trump's United States, or you make peace and come back to the fold of the BRICS. So this is where we are.
Okay. So the last question that I would want you to come towards is India's media. I know I've been going through your Twitter, your X account, and man, your humor is out of the park. So tell us about the Indian media. What Indian media did during these days, and how did this affect their own performance?
Well, India media, it's like it's very similar in a way to kind of the Anglo media in United States, except they take it to the 11. All the lies and propagandas, they just increases 300-fold, and like they are selling fantasy to their readership. They're painting this bizarre world. Like everybody right now could see, um, everyone in India was receiving information that's like 180 degrees different from what everybody else in the world was receiving. Even when CNN, Reuters, all confirming the Indian fighter jets were shut down and presenting the visual evidence, and you still have the Indian readership of Indian media who have been deluded and say, "Where's the evidence? It's unverified claim." I asked Grok, and Grok said it's unverified. But this is because this is this is because the Indian media. I mean, like, what I often make fun of Indian media. Then some of my Indian followers, oh, this is. Do you understand? Because we have free media, so you
Yeah,
can have
right.
people say all kind of things. Okay, I buy that. But if all of your media, if everyone is all saying crazy shit, then there's a problem,
That's
right? I
not
mean,
free.
if it's just like some French element, yeah, if it's just some French element in media, okay, okay, I understand. You if only 50%, okay, I still understand. But if everybody is saying all kind of crazy shit, that's a system problem. I mean, like, and I think it's plainly visible in the aftermath of this recent conflict to the people outside of India, how bad Indian media has been in terms of lying to their audience.